A little background information about me to start. I have PD, or panic disorder. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's a mental illness that causes extreme anxiety, severe panic attacks, and a slew of other problems. I've been suffering from this for over a year now, and while it is getting better, it's still very difficult to deal with, and keep this in mind. My husband and I have been married for over a year now. During most of the time we've been married, unfortunately, I was undergoing medical issues that no doctors could seem to explain. I was having panic attacks all the time, and it would be so severe I would have to be taken to the ER. They would have to literally sedate me just to calm me down. I was also losing weight at an exponential and very alarming rate, becoming visibly sicker and sicker as time went on. Not even a month after we married, I lost my job and was homebound, while my husband worked a second shift, which was 4 p.m. to 3 a.m. He would arrive home around 4, leaving me alone most of the time. My parents and younger brother did live close by, perhaps a 10-minute drive at most, but at the moment my mother and father were unable to watch over me. They did call as frequently as they could, but that was as much as they could do. In May, I was told by doctors I was literally at death's door, and unless something happened real quick, my family was going to lose me. I was given medications to help with the panic attacks and to get me to eat and the like. They wanted to hospitalize me, but I refused. My parents decided that when they and my younger brother went to Florida the next month, they were taking me with them. Again, keep in mind I was both anxious and extremely sick. At the same time, my real issues had just begun, and not with me either, but with our neighbors. You see, we'd never actually met our neighbors personally before this point. My husband lived in the trailer for a month on his own before we married, and he always said they were a bit odd, but they didn't seem to be of much concern. Once I came into the picture though, that all changed. The person who'd lived in the trailer before us was actually a cousin of mine, who'd rented from another cousin and his wife who lived states away. Nora was a huge druggie and a drug dealer, so people got real used to getting their fixes and drugs at the trailer we now lived in. A few months before we moved in, she got in trouble with the law and landed in jail for quite some time. I guess our neighbors, who according to our landlords were drug addicts and raging alcoholics as well, thought perhaps that she was back. I'm not quite sure. I suppose this is because I was so sick that they never actually saw who I was. They only knew that I was living there. They became active at night. During the day, they were mostly quiet. Every once in a while, they would do something outside, but for the most part, nothing really happened. It would always start after my husband left for work. My car would still be there, which I guess told them that at least someone was still home. It started off innocently enough, driving up and down in front of the house, parking in the road directly in front of it, and waiting for a long time. Sometimes they'd honk the horn at me, but I just ignored them. Several times I even called my parents because they'd stuck around so long, asking them what to do. They said for the time to just ignore them. Perhaps they thought Nora was back, and after some time they'd get the hint it was new people and leave me alone. So that's exactly what I did for a while. When they started driving up the driveway though and stopping at my porch, that's when I first called the cops. All I was told was that as long as they didn't encroach on my actual property, there was nothing they could actually do. They advised me to turn on the lights in my house and signal I was home. Needless to say, I did not sleep very well, despite needing to. My husband had the weekends off, and as you can guess, there were never any issues during the weekends. It was insane and infuriating. Everyone did believe me when I said I was having problems, but there was only so much they could do to help. My father-in-law brought over one of his shotguns, knowing that I was a good shot. He told me to use it if I ever needed it. One night, my husband was at work, and I guess my body finally shut off. I fell asleep for once, only to be awoken around 1 a.m. by the sound of our neighbor's truck tearing out from behind the trailer. I jumped up and looked outside, only to see them shooting out of our driveway. They started speeding up and down in front of the house. I called the cops again. I called my dad and mom, and my dad came over because I was in full panic attack. My dad called my husband, who then came home immediately. They even left tire marks in the grass behind the trailer, but nobody could necessarily prove it was them, despite me describing their truck down to the exact dents. My dad told the cops this had been going on long enough, but again, not enough evidence or proof. A week. Just one more week until I could go with my family to Florida. I somehow managed to be a bridesmaid in my older brother's wedding, despite being so sick. I was doped up on medications to keep me calm, so I wouldn't have a panic attack. I don't recall much about that day other than it rained because of this. My husband, naturally, was at work. When I got back, I was sitting at home and our 2 cats were asleep rather soundly. I was playing my 3DS with the TV on for some background noise. Around midnight, my cats suddenly woke up and became unglued. They ran to the side door, then to the front door, growling and hissing, their hair standing on end. They had never behaved that way before, so I started to get up to see what it was they were freaking out about. And then I heard it. "So, how we gonna do this?" I froze. I heard them. I heard their footsteps as they paced up and down on the front porch. I wasn't sure how many people there were, but I knew for a fact I could hear at least 3 distinct voices. The curtains were closed and the lights were off, but the TV was on. Surely they could hear it from so close. They got quieter. I heard their footsteps stomping all around. I grabbed my phone, shakily swiping until I found my dad's number and called him. "Hello? They're here! They're here!" I remember sobbing. "I'm on my way. Call the cops." I hung up on him, then heard them talking amongst themselves about how they were going to break in, what they wanted. I ran into the bedroom and grabbed the gun. I opened the chamber to see it fully loaded and called the cops myself. I left the lights off. I decided I was going to have them caught this time. I was not going to let them run off. I told them what was going on. As sick as I was, I managed to hold the shotgun to my shoulder pointed at the door, remembering everything my dad had taught me about shooting. I was scared out of my mind, though. I was breathing hard. "Calm your breathing, hun. You said they're outside?" "Yes, I heard one say they heard me, and then the other said it wouldn't be a problem." "Police are on their way, sweetie, I promise. I'm armed." "Excuse me?" "I said I'm armed." I could hear the people outside now talking about that, then silence. I heard their footsteps leaving, then saw the lights to my dad's truck. I lowered the shotgun and ran outside, my dad and younger brother running out of the truck. My dad had his Judge in his hand, which is a pistol that shoots shotgun rounds. My younger brother was holding a knife. I thanked the dispatcher for everything, and about this time the cops pulled up. I told my dad and younger brother to disarm. They put their weapons in the truck while I took my gun inside and put it on the top of the kitchen table. My dad told me to get back in the house and for my younger brother to go with me. As soon as I stepped inside, the panic attack hit. My dad came inside for a moment and hugged me, telling me how brave I had been, especially for holding it in as long as I did. I listened as he went back outside. The cops found footprints in an area on the porch where apparently the men had tried to break in at one point. They had all scattered, though, leaving it difficult for the cops to trace exactly where they had come from. My dad told them it was the neighbors. My landlords actually called and told the cops it was more than likely them as well. The cops noticed some of the footprints went to the neighbor's yard, but they weren't home, of course. I remember my dad and younger brother standing outside just as the cops pulled up, yelling as loudly as they could that they would drop them if they ever saw them around me again. I noticed my dad was crying as well. He wasn't the type of person to do that. My whole life, I've seen my dad cry maybe a handful of times. My dad had been scared he wouldn't get there in time, and maybe I would hesitate to protect myself. I wasn't going to let them get away with this anymore, though. That night, my husband came home from work and hugged me tightly. I thought my lungs would burst because it was so tight. I reassured him I was okay, though. A week later, I went to Florida. Time went on, and I started getting better. As for my neighbors, I never had problems with them again after. I'm not sure if it was the cops actually going to their house, or my dad and younger brother threatening to kill them. Maybe it was me, them hearing me say that I was armed. I don't know, and I don't really care. They're still there, but I don't think they'll try anything ever again. I work at a hospital a town over from where I live, and I work as an environmental service person, aka housekeeping. Every hospital worker has to wear a badge with a picture, first name, and your department listed on it. I'm a 5'2" woman, if that matters at all. I used to park out in the front of the hospital instead of our designated parking space. 1, it was more lit out in the front, and 2, it just seemed more convenient. Now, I park in the back in our designated area and walk out with a coworker who leaves at the same time I do. When I get to work, it's still in the early evening, so around 4ish or so. Normally, we have a few people outside/inside our waiting/wheelchair area. You'll occasionally get a few, "Hey, can you help me with this?" or "Do you know what floor so-and-so is?" People coming up to you because you're wearing scrubs and have a badge is not uncommon or weird, except for this one time. I got to work a little bit early so I could eat before clocking in and just get right to it. I was walking across the little crosswalk from the parking lot to the entrance when I hear a, Miss, could you help me with something?" I turn around and see a decently dressed man in his mid-30s. "Oh, sure, what could I help you with?" "My wife is on the 3rd floor, but I just can't figure out what entrance I'm supposed to use." "Oh, sure, you'll want to use this one, because the one all the way around to the left is for the emergency room. The one all the way to the right is for physical therapy in the senior center." "Okay, thanks. And what time do the doors lock exactly?" 8 o'clock, I believe." He nodded and walked through the doors. I didn't think that much of it, other than if his wife was on the 3rd floor, he should have known what door to use. I mean, it had main entrance written right on the front. I told my shift manager, who radioed to security to maybe keep an eye out for some weirdness. I continued working throughout the day and finally finished my shift. It was around midnight when I finally got outside the doors and halfway through the crosswalk when I heard, "Hey, it's good to see you." I turned around to see the same guy from earlier waiting on the bench outside. I gave a polite nod and continued my way to my car while unlocking my phone. I pulled up my shift manager's office phone number and got ready to call. "Hey, I want to talk to you. Come and chat." "Sorry, it's late, and I have people up and waiting for me at home." "Do you live around here?" "Come on, you're a pretty girl, and I'm a decent guy. Why wouldn't you want to chat?" I ignored him and just continued to walk as fast as I could without running. I could hear him speeding up behind me to follow me. After that sentence, I was about a foot or so away from my car. I pushed my automatic lock and swung my purse off my shoulder so I could chuck it into my car and slam myself in. "Hey!" I slammed my purse in, then slammed myself in, all while locking my doors and slamming my key in, getting ready to leave. He reached my car and pounded his fist on my window. "That's not cool, my name. Let's chat." I'm done talking to this guy at this point. I was seriously ready to just get home. I revved my car, letting him know that if he wasn't going to move, I was going to run over his foot. It was a good thing he was right next to the ER so he could limp over and explain how his foot got in that mess. I pulled my car out of park and slowly, one more time, revved my engine. He knew I was not fucking around. He stepped back and I pulled up to a few parking spaces before speeding out and getting out onto the road. The drive home was spent on the phone with my shift manager, who was radioing security to see if he was still out there and if they could see him anywhere else on location. They couldn't find him, but they did check the cameras. They saw that earlier in the day he'd been following me. Then, after I left, he'd followed me a bit too before meeting me. About 2 minutes after our confrontation, it showed him running away. I spent some time with security, and they told me they were going to forward this all to the police, then to use our designated parking space from now on. They also said to call if I saw him in the building or on shift, or when coming out of work in the future. This story begins about 5 years ago when I was a junior in high school. There was a boy in my grade, Jack, who didn't have a lot of friends. He's on the lower end of the autism spectrum, what used to be called Asperger's syndrome. That affected his ability to pick up on social cues in his interactions with peers. Although I always knew him to be a bit awkward, he was nice enough, and I felt badly that he spent so much time alone, eating lunch alone, sitting alone at all the school activities. When he joined theater junior year, an activity I'd been a part of since I was 6, I decided to help in bringing him into the fold. Although more creative clubs do have reputations for being more accepting, it's still a difficult thing to join halfway through when everyone is already close-knit friends with everyone else. I would make my best effort to include Jack in conversations with the groups at rehearsals, talk to him one-on-one, invite him to sit with us at lunch. I even gave him my phone number to chat about things once in a while. When he asked me to hang out with him after a month or so of friendship, I said yes. I came to his family's barn and had a very nice time visiting with all the animals and eating dinner with his family. They said a few heartbreaking things throughout the dinner, like it was so nice to see him finally having a friend. They said they liked me much better than the one other friend he had, who I knew to be a kid who also had some disabilities. Unfortunately, this is around the time when our interactions stopped being healthy. He developed a severe attachment to me. It became very clear to me that he saw me in a romantic way, which I didn't return the feelings. Now that wouldn't have been too problematic if he hadn't started to pursue me in such an obsessive manner. He began texting me every hour of the day. If I ever didn't reply, I would receive another text emphasizing his last, or he would copy and paste the same message over and over again. If it were simply him saying hello to start a conversation, he would post it again and again and again until I finally responded. This was not always me ignoring him, mind you. Sometimes I was at work and unable to respond. Then, when I would unlock my phone, I'd have 10 messages from him like this. Additionally, if I did talk to him, he began pouring out every deep thought to me about depression and even having considered suicide in the past. While I'm a compassionate person who will do anything to help others, this worried me for multiple reasons. One, I'm not a trained therapist, and while I can offer some support, I don't always know the right thing to say to help. The last thing I want to do is say the wrong thing and trigger someone into hurting themselves. Additionally, I feared that him sharing these vulnerable thoughts with me and having me comfort him would make him feel as though the bond between us was closer than it was and cause him to latch on even tighter. I tried my best and advised him to speak to our school guidance counselor, which he declined as he claimed that only I could ever understand him. Around this time, he began following me to work. I didn't have a license at the time, so I had to walk from school to my after-school shifts. The store was less than a mile away, so it didn't really bother me. Jack would find me at my locker and start talking to me on my walk to the front door of the school building. I would say, "Bye, I have to go to work," but instead of waiting for his ride, he would follow behind me through the parking lot, down the street, and the entire way to where I worked. As the store I worked at is one where the customers come up to the counter and can't come inside, he would just lurk around in the parking lot for 20 minutes to half an hour, never buying anything, before eventually turning around and walking back to the school. My manager and I were both very disturbed by this whenever it happened, and I would hide in the back or clean until he left. Then the performance of our musical came, and the creep factor amped up even more. He was still constantly texting me, of course, but at this point I was going through a lot of mental health issues of my own. I didn't really have the patience to deal with this constant bothering. I replied every few days or so, but I wouldn't engage in more than casual conversation. He began to incessantly comment on everything I posted, Instagram, Facebook, responding to every single tweet. In person, he also followed me around constantly. More than once, he'd attempted to barge into the girls' dressing room and made several comments about my body and specifically my breasts to my face during that week. He happened to leave his phone on a table by me, and when I went to return it, I saw his lock screen was a photo that said, "Boobs are like the sun. If you wear sunglasses, you can stare at them as long as you like." As soon as the musical was over, I didn't have to see him on a regular basis and decided to block him on everything. His constant replies were really starting to freak me out. I told him multiple times that I couldn't always be there to talk to him, but he never listened. I blocked his number. Summer was actually quiet. I enjoyed the fact I didn't have to see or hear from him for a long time. Unfortunately, the school year brought back some contact with him, as he was now a recurring member of theater. He tried to confront me about blocking him in front of a large group of people. I just said we could talk about it later, and he failed to bring it back up. 2 weeks later, though, I got a Twitter notification that my phone contact Jack had joined Twitter as a user posing as the school debate team. I also had a notification saying he'd followed me. He made a fake account for a club that didn't even exist at school just in order to follow me. To my advantage, he'd used his real phone number or email when making that account. Therefore, I was able to quickly block him and told my close friends to do the same. For most part, my senior year went mostly quiet, except for an incident where he'd parked right next to me and tried to hit my car. I'm somewhat sure it was just because he's a really bad driver, but I've always had a tinge of doubt in my mind. I wish I could say the story ended there, that his crush just faded out with high school graduation, and the blocks on his account and number gave him enough closure to move on. Fast forward to fall of 2017. It's been about 2.5 years since I graduated from high school. I was going through my account on Twitter and adjusting some things, and saw I still had some people set to notifications that I didn't really talk to anymore. Some people I'd blocked from old grudges that I'd long since gotten over. I saw Jack was still blocked, and figured that everything had occurred so long ago that he must be over it by now. I decided to unblock him, assuming the chances would be rare he would comment or do anything. Likes are innocent enough. How wrong I was. In my defense, it did take him quite a while to notice. Whether I just didn't pop up on his timeline for some time, or he just didn't use those applications for a while, I didn't hear from him until spring of 2018, 3 years after we'd left high school. He commented on something I posted, trying to start an argument. When I responded, he said he could never win an argument against me. Seemed innocent enough. I liked his comment and moved on. The next day, I got a message from him. "I see you're still the same as you were in high school." I responded for a bit and then stopped replying. It was only small talk, but I didn't want to contact him any further. I had a sinking feeling he was falling back in his old pattern. The next day, I got another message. Hey, are you there? I need to tell you something really important." I was taking a nap at the time, so I couldn't respond. 10 minutes later, according to the timestamp, he DM'd me the same message on Instagram and Twitter. Another 5 minutes later, I get the same message as a text, even though I didn't have his number. At this point, all the notifications woke me up. I was annoyed and felt I knew what he was going to say. "I had a huge crush on you in high school, and I still do now." At this point, I was enraged. I hadn't seen him in 3 years, or interacted with him at all during that time. He made my favorite activity stressful and uncomfortable for me. He followed me to work several times. He knows nothing about the person I'd developed into in the years since I graduated. I decided to do what I hadn't done at that point, which was explicitly tell him about how inappropriate everything he'd done was. I knew he had a disability that made it hard for him to tell how people felt about things he said or did, and that's why I felt I needed to be brutally honest. I decided clearly he had some kind of fixation on me that seemed to transcend the boundaries of distance, time, or sight, so I blocked and deleted him on everything since.